So, Emily, the last time that you were here, we talked about a book. Now, this time you've brought a comic, and probably what most people think of when they think of comics, like a Western style comic. Is that right?
Yes.
So, do you think that there's something special about the way that comics can reach people as opposed to books when you're reading those stories?
Yeah, so the thing about books is that it's only really up to the writer and the editing team. Whereas with a comic, there are far more voices behind the story, right? You have the writer and the artists and the letterers. And honestly, even like if one is even so, it can really make or break the comic. So you have a lot more people behind the story, and therefore you have a lot more voices and other people to influence it and reach people.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tales of Our Times. This is a show where we discuss the stories that move us, what makes them so meaningful, and why others could or should find meaning in them as well. This is not a spoiler-free show, so bear that in mind as you continue to listen. We tackle books, movies, comics, and more. Where there's a story, there's a reason to read. Now, I'm your host, Amanda Stevens. And joining me today is one of my very first guests come back to deliver to us another comic, which I'm very excited about, my friend Emily Daniel. Welcome back, Emily.
I'm so excited to be back.
I'm so excited you brought a comic because I mentioned it one time before, but it's been in my intro since the start of the show, and it has taken a long time for me to actually get to talk about these kind of stories with people, which is a shame because there's just so many good comics and graphic novels out there.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I've been reading comics for almost 10 years now at this point, so maybe a little more. And so it's kind of a little bit surprising to me that I didn't bring that for my first time. I brought a book instead, Howl's Moving Castle, if you haven't listened.
Yeah.
And so,
episode 3, go check it out. It's a very good one. Emily and I geek out for a really long time. But anyway, to comics. In recent years, I think people have finally started to, much like video games, kind of acknowledge the really good storytelling that can happen in graphic novels and comics. Mm-hmm. Like, people would talk about comics and other things like that. But it was really hard to get people to take those kind of books seriously. Even now, still, to some extent, I think it's still hard. But I think slowly society is kind of coming around on it. But there's some people who haven't heard your previous episode. So is there anything you would like to say to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Emily. I have been here in Taiwan for a little over 4 years now as an English teacher. And I don't know what else to say, Amanda.
Yeah, it's okay. You don't need to say anything else. But what story have you brought for us today?
I brought Matt Fraction's run of Hawkeye.
And now, this is something that's interesting. If you don't read comics, you may not be familiar with the idea of a run of comics. So, Emily, would you be able to define that for listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with that kind of style of comic writing?
Yeah, so obviously the thing about a lot of long comics with superheroes, there are different writers who will do it. So a run would be usually one artist and writer pair who are writing for throughout one story arc. So or sometimes multiple, but it is one overarching story. Sometimes it can last anywhere from a few months to a few years. Like in this case, this one was 3 years.
Yeah, they use the same characters in the same universe, but what they do with those and how they characterize the people inside, like you said, can be quite different. And so this is a run of the Hawkeye comic from 2012 to 2015. You might have just mentioned that, but we'll say it again. And that was by Matt Fraction and David Aha. So I don't really know much about Hawkeye, but I'm assuming it's the same one from the Marvel comics.
Yes. This run was released right after the Avengers movie came out. And so at that point, Marvel had decided to have all of the characters who were in the Avengers movie, they each had their own series, and they all led their own series. So this one is based off of Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye. So he is the man with the bow. So the big thing about him is that he doesn't have powers, right? Like he is one of the only ones who literally, like, his whole shtick is he shoots good, right?
Yeah. Like he doesn't have any magical superpowers, but he is like really, really talented to the point that he can keep up with these superheroes.
Yes.
Despite not actually having any superheroic powers.
Yes, exactly. So he's kind of like the a little bit more the regular guy, right? And so that's where for this one, that's really what this series focuses on. So this one was billed as, what does Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye, do when he's not being an Avenger?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I'm really intrigued now. So do you think you'd mind just like jumping into the summary for what happens?
Yeah, so it starts off with Clint Barton literally falling off a building.
Oh my God.
And then, yeah, so then, and then he obviously gets hurt really badly. But then it follows him along as in his building in New York, right? It is owned by a vaguely Russian mob. They're kind, they don't...
Someone who's a little bit shady.
Yes, by a mob, and they call them like the tracksuit guys. They're starting to kick out the tenants. They have tripled the price of rents of all of the tenants, and obviously rent in New York is already expensive, right? And now they're tripling it because basically they want to gentrify this whole area and turn it into a big shopping mall.
So they're trying to force people out of the apartments.
Yes, exactly. So but then Clint, he's like, no, like I don't want that. So then he ends up buying the building because he had a lot of like cash from
saving the world with the superheroes.
No, he stole it from his brother.
Oh my God. Okay.
That's a different run. But yeah, so then it's kind of goes based on what's the fallout from that. At this point, he also has the other Hawkeye. She's not a sidekick, very important, Kate Bishop. And so he's kind of her mentor.
So there's two Hawkeyes. Yes. There's the one that we remember from the movies, and then there's another Hawkeye. She just goes by the same name.
Yes. Well, Clint was off being not Hawkeye, and she kind of filled that role of Hawkeye.
Okay. So what are some things that happen after they buy the building? Like what kind of fallout happens, and how do they deal with it?
Yeah. So at one point their S.H.I.E.L.D. is trying to smoke out a mole that they have. And so then part of this is Clint and Kate have to go undercover in order to buy a tape that supposedly shows Clint killing killing somebody in power. And then in that, Kate pretends to be a different villain, Madame Mask. So because of that, Madame Mask has a big grudge against Kate specifically and wants to kill her. And then all of the big bad elite in New York, because again, they all want to gentrify this building and this area. Okay. And because obviously Clint Barton he's the one building in this area that has not been bought. And so then they decide, we're going to put a hit out on him. And at this point, obviously he's an Avenger. So that was a pretty big deal. They hire a different killer. And so he is trying to kill Clint, and then Kate had decided, at some point, I'm done with, like, New York, I'm going to LA, not knowing that Madame Mask, her territory is LA. So she's trying to kill Kate in LA. Clint is trying to not die in New York. And so then it's them trying to then come back to save each other.
And do they ultimately, I assume they don't die because it has to continue.
Yeah.
So are they able to get out of this kind of pickle?
Yes. So Kate is able to defeat Madame Mask and come back to New York. During that point, she realizes her father, who he has a lot of money, he okayed the hit out on both her and Clint.
Oh, so her father's evil.
Yeah, he's capitalist, man. He has a lot of money.
He's just like regular business evil.
Yes. But then she comes back right as Clint and the tenants of this building, they are kind of holding a last stand against the tracksuit guys and against this contract killer. And so as they're all trying to essentially save their homes, right? From
the evil organization.
The evil capitalists.
The evil of capitalism.
Exactly.
In this scenario.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. And they do. They eventually are able to take them down and keep their homes.
Do they get the lowered rent?
That was never explicitly said. However, I like to believe that after Clint bought the building, he wasn't charging the tenants, like a good landlord.
You're right. Yeah, if he owns a building, he doesn't have to charge rent at all.
Yeah, he's their new landlord.
Wow. So this sounds like a pretty grounded superhero comic, to be honest.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, it really was just him. He was trying to do good, right? He initially didn't buy this building for any reason other than he saw the tracksuits literally trying to kick out a single mother and her 2 kids. And then he saw the tracksuits about to hurt this dog, right? And he went, that's not okay. Save the dog,
Which is, it's funny you say that because that's like almost exactly a literary term.
Does
For
the
those
dog
of
die?
you, well, no, even another one. For those of you who don't know, in a lot of superhero comics, especially, to quickly establish whether or not somebody is good or bad, there is something called a kick the dog moment and a save the cat moment. The save the cat moment is when we find out who the hero is because they do something that is like overwhelmingly like has to be good, like save the cat from the tree or save the dog from the gangster. And then the kick the dog moment, which it doesn't have to involve a dog, right? But it's like then they go and they steal candy from a baby or they kick a puppy and you're like, all right, that's definitely a bad guy.
The gangsters literally pushed the dog into traffic, right? And
Isn't what it's the kick the dog moment. So we know who the bad guy is going to be.
Yeah. And that was also, again, issue number 1 of this was kick the dog into traffic. Clint saves him.
There we go. So there we have our moments. Well, this is actually a really new comic. So I think what I want to ask you first is what your first experience was with this. How did you find it?
Yeah. So, like I said, I had been reading comics for a couple of months before I started reading this one. And I started maybe halfway through this run. And I remember, so like I'm big on Tumblr. So followed a lot of like people who would reblog a lot of things about comics. And then I kept seeing this one just pop up on my dash. And I was like, okay, I like the art style. I'll give it a go. And I remember I was in college. I had a big report at the time. And instead I binged this until, far later than I really should have been.
Oh, so you read it like close to the time that it came out then?
It was about halfway through, give or take.
Wow, that's so fun.
Yeah.
Were you reading it online? I have to assume.
I started reading it online, but then it was actually one of the first ones that I actually ever bought because I really liked the stories.
Now, I have to ask you this question too. Was it a like paper magazine-esque book or was it like all compiled into what we think of as like a book or graphic novel?
So I have the first couple in that like compiled where it's what we think of as a graphic novel, but I do have the last, I don't know, maybe 12 issues in the little mini.
The paper magazine that you, how?
The little single issues.
Dare I ask, how much did it cost to buy a single issue of a comic like back in at the latest 2015?
I believe Marvel at that point was either $2.99 or $3.99.
That's so fun.
Yeah.
A big change from like the 25 cents it's on a lot of those covers.
Yep.
But still, like, I'm still impressed. Like, I haven't bought anything like that for a while. Moving on from there, why do you care so much about this comic run? This Hawkeye series? Like, what really stuck out to you?
So it really does a good job of playing with different storytelling, like and ways of storytelling. There is the iconic like pizza dog issue, which is
the one where he finds the dog?
No.
Oh.
It is an issue that is told entirely from the perspective of the dog.
Oh.
Yeah. So this one is very interesting in that it has very few words and it is like very visual, right? And also they kind of try to show how the dog might like sense, like smell or hear.
Like, is it that the dog doesn't have any internal monologue? The words that we see are all words from people interacting with the dog.
Yeah, so it'll be like two characters will be having a conversation. And then you can see where some of the words are, but some of the words it's just little scribbles. And then they'll have one or two words that are highlighted in that speech bubble.
Just the words that the dog understands.
Yes. It is still laid out like a normal comic, right? Where you have two characters who are having a conversation, but you don't know what that conversation is because you're not a dog. But yeah, and then what's actually also cool is that the issues right after it shows some of those same events, but now you get the words that go with it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's fun. So it's like it telling the same story, but from different points of view.
Yes. And then the other issue that, I don't know, I feel like people talk about the pizza dog one, but the one that really got me is there's a sign language issue because, yes.
So tell us more about the sign language issue. How do they do that visually, graphically?
Yeah. So as part of the plot, the killer who is going after Clint Barton, he injures him and injures his hearing. Right now, Clint Barton is canonically partially deaf. Right. Oh. So as a child, him and his he learned sign language with his brother, and so then that comes back when now he is partially deafened due to this injury. And so on the very first page, usually it would have Hawkeye written in words, but on this one, they have it finger spelling in ASL. With
the hands showing the words.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
So it has it's just the letter H, the letter A, the letter W, K,
You're not in studio. Emily is spelling it out with her hands right now as well as she's talking.
Yes.
Oh, cool. And then is the dialogue, so to speak, like, do they have people doing hand sign dialogue? Do they show it as well? Or like a lot of times in these graphic novels, like they'll show people like with one or two drawings, but it's not an animation. So they'll have like a little box that describes what they're speaking. Is that similar or less?
It has actually, you only actually hear or like can read the words that Clint actually knows, right? And or is even looking at. So there's a while.
So he's not fluent.
No, he is. He is.
Oh, okay. But
he is.
Ooh,
but
sorry.
So he's kind of being obstinate at that point. He so this is kind of the moment where he's realizing just how much trouble he is in. And so he is just kind of he's realizing I'm in a little bit over my head, right? And he's kind of trying to run away and ignore it, right?
Yeah.
And so his brother is trying to talk to him about it using both words and ASL because his brother knows that he can read lips. But Clint is just kind of like, no, ignore it, nope.
Right. So when he's not choosing to engage with it in the only medium in which they can speak,
yes,
then you're not going to get that dialogue either.
Yes. And then they also do show like several like hand signs that are kind of in, if you were to look online at like learning like style, where it'll show you a little bit of like the hands and then a little bit of arrows for where the hands would move.
Right. So they're diagram like in that way.
Yep. And so they show that. And what was also interesting is that the issue after it even continues to show more of those issues with Clint actually being partially deaf. And so there's a moment where he's trying to read lips, and there's a few words where it has like question marks because obviously lip reading isn't an exact science, right?
Right. So like the times in which he's not really sure, it's like that's also like missed information.
Yes.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so creative.
Yes.
So I guess the last question I want to ask you is, why do you think this is a tale of our time?
Yeah, so for me, I think one thing I would really say is just the relatability of this comic, right? And so it has a lot of different ways that people can relate to it, whether it's through the evils of capitalism, right? Being disabled, and so some of the issues that may come with that, or, you know, various like communication and issues with that. Or sometimes you're trying to do good, and sometimes you make it worse for you and other people because I guess, of that.
Relatively speaking, like doing good in a mundane way, in terms of like, it's not mundane to buy an entire building, but compared to the other people that he's competing with in like a superhero universe, the difference between like, you know, destroying an alien invasion versus buying a building so the tenants can live there, they don't get forced out onto the street, and they don't have to pay triple times already an outsized rent, is a much more mundane way of doing good. And then getting punished for that too. Yes, exactly. And how he does get punished, right? And so there's actually a point where he ends up getting arrested, and then after this run, he actually loses his Avengers status because he had been arrested, because Avengers have to be good, they can't be arrested, right? So then it really does like show, you know, you may be trying to do the right thing, but you still have to deal with the consequences of those actions. Right. You know what they say, there's no rest for the wicked. So, or no good deed goes unpunished. That's the better one. Okay. Well, I mean, we're out of time, but it's time for me to ask you the question you've known was coming this whole time. If you could give this, not the whole Hawkeye series, but this run, right, its own one phrase subtitle, what would that be? What about no superpowers, no superpowers, no lip service? Well, I mean, I like it. I like it a lot. I want to stick with it. But I appreciate this too as a way in which the comic medium can shine, because you wouldn't really be able to get across all these different ways of communication in a book. Yes. You wouldn't have an ASL book in that. What are you going to read? Right. It's not as easy to get across without the non-visual medium. So no superpowers, no lip service, but like a vast array of different communicative styles. Well, thanks, Emily, for bringing that to us today. Thank you for having me. Unfortunately, we're all out of time. So thank you to you once again for joining us, and thank you to everybody else out there for joining us on Radio Taiwan International. This has been Tales of Our Time. I'm your host, Amanda Stevens, with my wonderful guest, Emily Daniel, and we have been discussing Hawkeye, the run from 2012 to 2015 by Matt Fraction and David Aha. I hope that you enjoyed learning more about this comic, Hawkeye, no superpowers, no lip service. A tale of our time. We'll see you next time.